August 30th, 1997. We're in Columbus, Ohio at the 51st 12th Armored Battalion reunion, 51st one. Today I'm interviewing George Hatt, George Hatt Jr., and my name is Charlie Henson. George, let's start with a little bit, kind of get us, we have taped you before. This is the second, I think this is the second
right.
session.
The first one was done, I don't know, at least a year ago. At that time, we cut off the story before we got to the Rhine River, and we were running this thing chronologically. But I was a member of the Company A of the 17th Armored Infantry Battalion. I was in the mortar squad of the 3rd Platoon. I came in there from ASTP, Texas Tech, in April, and now we're talking about not quite a year later, and we're getting ready to make a drive to the Rhine. I guess that's where we are. As far as introductory, I guess that pretty well covers where we are. Yeah. Before we went on the drive to the Rhine, Charla, we were in a place called Zimming Barracks, and we were there for quite a while. And it wasn't really an interesting place because we were just doing a little training and getting inspected and stuff like that. The captain found a hand grenade in my gas mask bag, and I would have gotten in trouble with that, but he sympathized with me because I'd come out of early time and had had a real bad time. He understood how I felt about having something. So they wanted to move us up to a place. This would have been the first place we were in Germany. And the German army or soldiers were in France. So we were right on the border in Lorraine, on the north. The particular area we were in was referred to as the baby factory because that was a place of a lot of new little homes that were built up into a nice looking neighborhood. No one was living in there. Lots of gardens growing. We found out that there were a lot of young women were coming there who were pregnant, impregnated by SS troopers. So we named the place the Baby Factory. How's that for a name? So that's why, if you ever hear the word baby factory, that's why it was called that, because of Hitler's idea that he was going to fill the world full of these great Aryan people. We set up on a line that overlooked Forbach, which was in France. Our squad, now by that time I was the squad leader. I started as a low man on the totem pole originally. And I was the only guy left in the squad, really, that was still active in that squad. A couple others went to another squad, to other squads in our platoon, and became squad leaders in the other squad. So I was the squad leader, and we placed our mortar on a hill in a sort of a wooded area, except it was open where the mortar is, so it could fire. Rifle squads were located down below, and then we had a telephone from the outpost where the rifle squads were up to our mortars, and I got a message: send Hatt down here. We've got something we need to do. And I went down there, and Pappy Childs was down there. Man, he was a brave man, brave man. Just he was older than most of us. And he was smart. I mean, as a soldier. He wasn't an educated man, but he was smart. We got in this house, and across the field there was some other houses over there, 150 yards away, 200 yards maybe. He said, Hatt, you see that house over there? The one with the chicken coop in the back? Look up there and you'll see a window with the shutters drawn. He said, sometimes those shutters are open, Other times we look out, they're closed. Stand back, don't get close to that window. And I saw him. He said, we need to do something. We think there's a German observer in there. Okay. You think you can do something with the mortar? I said, I don't know. Let me get on the phone and talk to my gunner. So I called back and talked to Harold Durst. Harold, so I made an estimate. I said, fire around over here. I didn't know how far it was. I heard boom way over on the other side. And I said, pull it in. I heard boom and still on the other side. Then I called one more change and boom, and it fell right in the chicken yard. You should have seen chickens flying every which way. But then I said, well, we were right halfway in between. So I made a half a correction. And so help me, I fired 3 rounds. One hit the roof, one hit in the yard, and the third one hit right on the window sill of the window he was talking about. And those Germans never opened that window again, apparently. But Pappy said, oh, you're really good with that mortar. But that's what happened. That's just a war story about what happened up at the baby factory. We were ordered to get ready to make a night attack on Forbach, and we were all very relieved because it was called off. And after, I don't know, it was maybe 5 days up there, not over 6. Well, during that time, we kept hearing the Germans fire these rockets, whoosh, whoosh, but they weren't hitting in our area. But so we were very glad to get out of there. Well, I could tell a lot of stories. I wanted to tell you how Dayton Warren got hit down there in that same house where we were observing, but that's just too much more of a story to continue on for the time that we have. We went back to Zimming. Orders were, take all of your patches off your uniforms. Paint out all of your 12th Armored symbols on your vehicles. Turn in all of your barracks bags. They're going to be stored. We don't want any indication of what this outfit was. And then we were on the road and we drove all night. Well, all that day and all that night. And believe me, these columns go slowly. They don't drive 50 miles an hour, these big heavy vehicles. And when night came, and it was so dark, and here came the Red Ball Express in their trucks. Now, this was a special unit in World War II, Red Ball Express. Lights on. And you weren't supposed to drive with your lights on, but those guys were in such a big hurry, they had them on and blinded my driver. He ran up on a wall and broke the wheel off of our half-track, and we ended up leaving him and the broken half-track there and riding with other people to their consternation. They said, we don't have enough room in here for ourselves. Then we started on, we went past the Moselle River, and we could see as we turned eastward in the Rhineland, we could see German equipment hidden behind barns and trees as we went up, because I think it was the 94th Infantry Division had broken through there, and we came through there and saw all of these artillery pieces and tanks and trucks and everything hidden in there. We went right straight through. So we were on our way for the drive to the Rhine, riding in other people's half-tracks, and they're all complaining. And about the first night, Harold Durst was off somewhere, one of my squad members, my gunner really, and he came back and he was driving a 3/4 ton American truck. And I said, where'd you get that? He said, we caught a bunch of Germans up here with this truck, and I guess they kind of wiped them out with the light. They turned the headlights on them as they heard them. And this was apparently a truck that was captured in the Battle of the Bulge from the Americans, and the Germans were using it. And we got it back, and that became our squad's half-track for a long time. Everybody was in armor, and we were out in this thing that was like a Jeep, almost. It's bigger than a Jeep. So we drove east and went down through the Rhineland. This was so different from anything that we had ever experienced before, because we were moving day and night and not out walking at the possibility of running into machine guns or something like that, like we were down at Hurlesheim. And when I say we were driving, we never stopped. We drove day and night. The drivers were doing this on the steering wheel, falling over and falling asleep. Anytime you'd stop, well, the drivers would all go to sleep. And you'd think, well, that's pretty bad. But I'll tell you what, we went right straight through there and not a single casualty all the way up to the Rhine River. Up at the Rhine River, just pull back from there, maybe a mile or so, we were assembled in a field. Now this assembly means, but you're really spread out, because you know you may be attacked. And here came the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe. They'd come over and they would drop bombs. Now there weren't a whole lot of these, but there were enough that we knew we were under attack. I remember one that came over, dropped bombs, and our anti-aircraft was firing at them and firing low, and the bombs fell in the 50 caliber machine gun fire and flew all to pieces, these bombs. So pieces just came floating down. They were heading right for me. I just knew it. But I felt like the anti-aircraft saved my life, but that, that's an exaggeration, I'm sure. So we were in that situation until we were given orders to turn south, as I understand it, to close with the 7th Army. So because the 7th Army, at that time, see, we had been assigned to the 3rd Army. That was Patton's Army on the drive to the Rhine. And now we were still doing that, but we were to go south and then meet up with Patch coming up, and then the Germans were to the west of there, a big German army. And on that way down, it was pretty bad. We were running into ambushes. We had one of our half-tracks hit, and I'm sure you've heard that story from others in my platoon that killed a bunch of our guys. After clearing some of those large towns like Ludwigshafen and Speyer and those others, well, and then we moved up south of Worms, and there was a big bridge there, pontoon bridge. Across the pontoon bridge. And that river was that's a big river. It's wide, it's like the Mississippi. We went across there, got on the other side, and we knew we were really heading into the heart of Germany. Well, it was not a bad kind of war when you could just drive on and you weren't running into any serious resistance at all. People shooting at you. You'd run into roadblocks every now and then in some of these towns, and those are built out of logs. They'd bury logs on each side of a street, for example, between houses, and then there would be a set of logs here, a set of logs here, standing up on each end, and they'd lay logs on top of that. It didn't take long to dismantle that thing, but it would slow us down. And we were driving through something that was called the Odenwald. And it's mountainous region, just east of the Rhine River, just east of the Rhine land. And now I can speak with a little bit of my knowledge from my own research, if that's all right, that I didn't know at the time, instead of just telling a straight story. Is that okay, Charlotte?
Yes, sure is.
Okay.
It'll help put it together in context.
It turned out that the Germans apparently decided to take the Tauber River, which ran more or less north and south, as a line of resistance, and we were still heading east, and we were heading toward a town that was called Königshofen. Well, there was some shooting, some snipers, and I think some of the fellows were getting shot, killed, but it was not really all that, bad in a general sense. Early one morning, we were going down this narrow road. The next town was Königshofen. And Königshofen was right on the other side of the Tauber River. The Tauber being a line of resistance then, and we didn't know it, meant we were really going to run into trouble. And who were the people we were going to run into? We didn't know at that time until we began to see some of them, but they were apparently Hitlerjugend type troops, young men, half of them about 16 years of age, with things called Panzerfaust, which is like what we call a bazooka, is a thing that could knock a tank out. One man could carry it. And they had machine guns. There were a few 88 anti-tank guns scattered around in different places. And in fact, there was one in apparently there in Königshofen aimed right down the road over the Tauber River at us. And we had some vehicles knocked out there, and we'd stop, we'd back up. And we sat there for about a day or so. I recall my squad was assigned to take a field artillery observer up to the top of the hill. And he said, if you'll take a look over there now, you can see some German artillery. They had some 88 artillery guns and other things. He says, our job is to knock that thing out. We were hiding up on the top of this hill, hopefully not to be seen, and we weren't. He called for fire, and put one back in the woods behind them, and put another one close to them, and you could see the German soldiers moving around. And then, when that second one fell, they began to head for the trenches that they had there, and then he called for fire for effect. And he called back and he said, we've destroyed so many artillery pieces over there and anti-aircraft guns.
What does fire for effect mean? You said fire for effect?
Fire for effect. Mm-hmm. That's really an artillery term. I can't tell you exactly what it means. You'd have to ask one of the 495th or 493rd guys or something. Okay. It means that once the observer thinks that he has the artillery piece aimed at a target that needs to be hit, then there was some sort of a preset number of rounds, maybe a whole company of, they're not called, a whole battery. A whole battery might fire at one time at this one place. So they get one gun that's set on it, and everybody else sets according to that gun, and then they fire the rounds. And that fires for effect. And the effect is, up to that time, they were only shooting to locate, make sure they're pointed at the target. So like, here's the target. They shoot here. Maybe they shoot one here. Then they make a correction, like I did with that mortar. As soon as they know that that's where it is, they say fire for effect, and it all comes down here. That town, I remember seeing some Air Force Black Widow, at least one. It was dark, it was nighttime. My squad was kind of up on the side of a hill. And we could see this Black Widow flying around. We went over there and dropped bombs in behind what appeared to be behind the Königshofen. And there was some bombing in the town itself. We had kind of a disastrous event there. Carl Lyons' platoon, I know, was starting out on with a group of the troops. The Tauber River was still on up here a ways, and he was going across the field, and our own artillery fired short, fired like firing for effect right into his platoon, and killed about 4 of his men. That was our artillery. In recent years, they call it friendly fire. That wasn't what it was called then. It was called making a mistake. And that was really bad. Went up there with Sergeant Pappy Childs on a patrol. We got up clear up to the river, got under the bridge. We didn't run into any resistance. We pulled back, and soon after that, while the entire column came forward and we got on, we were able to drive right through the town. No resistance at all. We continued on. From there, we began to we were really getting into the heart of Germany in that part. We were sort of in the northern part of Bavaria. It seemed like we were going around in circles. We'd attack this place, come around and attack another place, and we'd usually go in the daytime and make a tag. We'd if we ran into resistance, why we'd fight that, and if we didn't, why we'd go right on to the next place. And then when nighttime, when it was about dark, then we'd stop and we'd go into town and we'd sort of take it over and put our tanks around the outside, along with there would be a group of, there'd be tanks and infantry usually, and we'd have a circular type of protection around the town with infantry soldiers around the outside, and then 2/3 of them would be asleep and 1/3 of them would be out there on post. And we didn't have much trouble. Once in a while there'd be a German patrol or something come in and they'd get a little shooting going. But after making those circular things, but I believe what was happening is they were trying to clean out this area and of troops. So the people that were high up and knew everything, they had the intelligence, they knew exactly what they're doing. And I guess it finally got cleaned out. And we were in the area of Würzburg and south of Würzburg mainly. And there were a lot of little towns. And we were going into, I guess, the different companies were going into these different towns. We went into one that was called AIB, A-U-B. And there was a fight, there was a pretty good sized fight there. And we blew the tower down in that, our tank, we got our tanks blow the tower down in that town. And to this day, they're sort of like a postcard picture of that tower getting blown down by the 12th Armored Division. And I went back there for a visit, and the fellows there gave me some of those pictures, which you may have. You probably have them at Abilene Christian. But after clearing that area, we really turned south, and I guess we were in a strategic way. We were heading for the redoubt, the Alps Mountains. But it was a day-by-day thing where we would travel in the day and attack we were in our armored vehicles when I say travel. If we ran into resistance, we'd usually get off our vehicles and we'd walk to attack, clear out the resistance. One thing that was learned fairly early was that the way we had them, the vehicles lined up was really causing a lot of problems. It started out with like a tank or half-track out front, and the tank would have its crew in it, and the half-tracks would have their squad in it. You'd maybe have a tank and a half-track, and then, or maybe 2 or 3 half-tracks, and then a couple more tanks, and that kind of thing. The first thing that would happen is an ambush. And Panzerfaust was a common thing, although we did run into anti-tank fire. Hit one of the vehicles, and it would cause a lot of casualties because they were full of people. And they'd hit they'd hit the first one more often, maybe the second one, but the first one more often. And what was learned was that you needed to take the fellas out of the half-tracks, put them on the back of the tank. That protected the tank, and it kept the vehicle, the infantry vehicle, from being completely full of men, which if it did get hit, it'll cause a lot of casualties. And so it protected the tank crew and it protected the men, and that was a change in the way we were doing things right there. I would say about the time that we were in the process of maybe doing this circular kind of clean out in the central part of northern Bavaria. So I guess the commanders were learning, and we were too. I'm waiting for a question.
Oh, I'm just letting you go.
Well, I try to think, oh, okay. There was one town. This is a typical example in some ways and very untypical in others. These were mostly farming communities, these small towns. As we came up on one town, there was indication that someone had picked up that the town was being defended. It had Germans. They would say it this way: it has German soldiers in it. So instead of going right into the town, driving right into the town, our vehicles began to go around the outside. But then, and our particular squad was involved in this one. They said, "Okay, Hatt, take your squad," and I don't know, maybe there was more than one squad, and go on into the town and take prisoners. So they say there's some German soldiers in there. So we went in, and yeah, they were in there, and they were shooting a little bit. We found that if you were patient, they could see that they were going to be overwhelmed, and finally they'd quit. If you just jumped up and ran into it, you stood a good chance of getting hurt. The thing that was unusual about that event was the mayor of the town came out and wanted to know who was in charge, and they pointed to me, and he came and he says, Meenen. Meenen. And I knew what he was talking about. He was talking about mines. That was a German word for mines. And he wanted to show us. So we went over to the road that went into town, which probably was the road we would have driven in on. He said, and you could see on the road that somebody had done something that was dirt sort of smoothed out in 2 or 3 places there. He said, Meenen, there were mines there. And I said, okay, we need to go back and tell our company commander that there are mines here, and let's so that the engineers can come up and take them out. So I went on back over to the part of town where I could then go find the company commander, who was still out on the bypass, and I heard this tremendous explosion. I went back over there, and one of our guys had walked into town and stepped on one of those big anti-tank mines. And this is a kind of story that you don't like to hear, but this is what happened. He was a young boy. He was about 18 years old. And when I talked to some of his buddies, I said, what was he doing coming into town like that when the column was out here? You know, they walked maybe 100 yards and got on his mind. I said, well, he thought he would go in there and find a little loot or something. And he walked in there, stepped on a mine, and killed him. One of the disasters of war for a young guy like that.
How did y'all deal with young recruits and stuff when they came? Not young recruits, replacement troops. What was your philosophy, or how did you deal with them?
I don't know that we had a philosophy. We certainly had a feeling. We were young guys. You know, I had a number of replacements in, and some of them were not so young, and some of them were very young right at the end of the war. we'd get acquainted with them, tell them what we do, tell them what our job is, tell them, you got to be careful about doing this. Here's what you ought to do it this way, and watch these other guys and kind of follow along with them. And so it's not a real formal kind of training thing. They had their training back at home in the U.S. and they came in. So you just became acquainted with them. Really didn't get very close to each other. I mean, became pals because these guys would come in and then they'd be gone. Our original really good friends were the ones we went overseas with. When they were gone, then you never had anybody like that again. We did have one man from Grukowski. He was an interesting character. Grukowski came in and he had, I think he wanted a carbine. I said, but you're a rifleman, Grukowski. You're supposed to carry an M1. He said, well, he says, I really can't handle it very well. And he held his hand up, and this finger, his trigger finger, was gone. I said, how'd you get in this outfit? He said, well, the Army was looking for people to volunteer for the infantry. He said, I decided I wanted to do that. I wanted to get into the fight. I said, but the trigger finger's gone. I said, how'd you get by with that? He said, well, when the doctor came by to inspect us, I put my hand behind my back. And that's the truth. I said, but what's this about not carrying an M1? He said, well, I found out one time. I always used this one for a trigger finger, and when you fired, that little handle on the bolt came back and hit me in that finger, and I'll tell you, that nearly killed me. That really hurt. He said, but the carbine, I could dodge it somehow. So I said, okay, you can have a carbine. Grukowski, I know about the first day that we had, and we took a certain amount of satisfaction in having a new guy come in and then run into a tough situation and scare the heck out of him, and the rest of us would sit around, that's everything. That was the day that we went into a small town, and it was defended, and our mortar was set up to fire, and the Germans picked up with their mortar that we were there, and they fired rounds right down toward our mortar, and if we hadn't pulled out and moved to the side, they would have hit our mortar. And if I hadn't walked back from where I was, it would have hit me because they put one right where I was standing when it started. So that was the beginning of the thing, and they had some tanks up front with the rifle outfit, and they were so there was some machine gun fire, and they finally got the Germans to quit there, and they got on the other side. There were Germans dug in there, and one of our guys got killed over there. So we got into town and we had it. Then here came these Me-262s over. Now, you know what an Me-262 is? That was the first German jet airplane. They came flying over and dropping bombs just as they were coming over the town. They were fairly high, and so the bombs just whistled clear, and they had whistles on them. And whistled it down and falling behind the town, and what they were doing is dropping bombs on our half-tracks, which were back, I don't know, a mile and a half or something, back where we left them. And when things quieted down a little bit, Grukowski looked at me. His first day, he said, I won't use the words he used. He said, does this happen all the time? I said, well, not all the time, but there's a lot of it. And I thought, well, the guy is probably really sorry that he had volunteered for the infantry. That was Grukowski. He was an unusual man because he's from St. Louis, but he also said he was from a town, Laredo, which is on the border of Mexico in Texas. And I never knew anything about his private life, but I was very suspicious of Grukalski because we went in, we were in one fairly large town, not really a city, but it was pretty good size. I don't know which one of those towns it was, Anspach maybe. And we stopped and we were told, this house, you hang around this house here, this is where you're going to be, it's like a building, and things were quiet. I mean, there wasn't any shooting, fighting, or anything. And 3 of my guys took off, one of which was Grukalski. They came back after about an hour, and they had a sheet. I said, what have you got? I said, come in here. They came in, and they emptied the sheet, and it was full of cameras. I said, where did you get these? So old Grukalski, he got the safe open down here in a camera store, and emptied all the cameras out of that safe and brought them back. He said, help yourself if you want a camera. The rest of us who went and got it, we've got the cameras we want. They must have had 12 or 15 cameras in there. That was Grukalski. He was a different kind of man. Down at the Danube River, the 17th was not a part of the taking of the bridge at Dillingen. But we were sent about a day later upstream on the Danube, alongside the Danube River. Company A, our company, was on point, traveling along. Oh, it seems so slow when you think about it, maybe 5 or 10 miles an hour with all this armor. And the word was that we were going to a town there, typical German name, I can't remember now. But there was another bridge up there. I wanted to capture that bridge, and so it could let more troops go. I think they had a bunch of infantry division troops coming up about that time. So we're going along for quite a ways, and suddenly there was a big explosion at the front of the column. And our half-track was, oh, by the way, we had gotten a half-track. Our driver had finally gotten back with a nice half-track with a radio in it. And we could tune in Axis Sally, and she'd play all these good Glenn Miller pieces and then tell us, you boys might as well give up, you Americans, you might as well surrender. We're going to really the Germans are really going to wipe you out and all that. But we enjoyed the music anyway. So our half-track was never a point half-track because we were a mortar squad, okay? But there was a big bang at the head of the column. It was a Panzerfaust that had been fired at one of the vehicles and missed it. So the whole thing stopped. Everything stopped. We sat there. And then they got out. The infantry, or the rifle squad got out, chased these men, and got them, took them prisoner. They're about mounted up to start moving again, and there was a tremendous explosion. And it was not very far away. It blew up the bridge that we were supposed to capture. So the Germans destroyed that bridge. That was the biggest single explosion I remember in the war. Boy, smoke went up hundreds of yards in the air. So instead of turning around or going on up, we decided to return. I guess the commander said, okay, we got to return. But instead of turning around, where the vehicles would all have to back up on them, turn around, this kind of thing. And there's always a danger of mines being planted on the side of the road in the dirt. Put it in reverse, and I think we backed up about 10 miles, the whole thing in reverse gear. We got back to town and crossed. By that time, the engineers had put a bridge up upstream of Dillingen, and that's the one where we crossed. From there, the place that really sticks in my mind is between 2 huge lakes, Ammersee and Wormsee. And we were given one afternoon, we were given the responsibility in our task force to go between these lakes and clear it out of enemy troops, and we did that. We came up to the north end of one of the lakes. It's a place called Stornberg. It was there that we got our orders that we were going to take off the next day and head for the German Autobahn. We were very close to Munich at that time, and there was an Autobahn that ran east from there. We drove early in the morning. We drove across through some little towns and kind of crossed fields and things, and we came to this big Autobahn. And this is the first time I remember ever being on an Autobahn in the war as such, and spearheading down an Autobahn. And we turned and headed in a sort of a southeasterly direction. And we were going maximum speed in our half tracks. No tanks, Jeeps and half tracks. The 17th. Company A and Company C were the 17th Battalion at that time, because Company B had been assigned to Tank Battalion, the 23rd Tank Battalion. So this was the group that was going down, Company A and Company C. Company C, I think, was in the lead. We were beginning to get into the mountains. It was, you could see mountains, high hills, and came to I don't know, like maybe a creek or something had come there, but it was a deep chasm with a bridge over it. And here these C Company guys were scattered across the bridge, shooting down in the bridge. And we hollered, "What are you guys doing?" It said, "The German engineers are down here trying to blow this bridge out." So we got on across and continued on. And then the fellows that were, I guess, then got on their half tracks and followed us after the rest of the column had gone on through. What really happened was the bridge really was finally blown up, and our tanks couldn't get through, and our artillery couldn't get through, and B Company couldn't get through with the 23rd tanks. And we ended up close to a place called Rosenheim, right by the Inn River. A town called Fraundorf. Fraundorf was our objective. And Fraundorf was where we were, and it was amazing because we were not running into any resistance at all. We got down to Fraundorf, and we had traveled 60 miles that day, which was a record for going into enemy-held territory. And there we were, the 17th down there, these two companies, no tanks, no artillery, in the middle of the German army-occupied area. We've become very proud of having done that. That's a record for us, I think. It took a couple of days for the tanks to catch up with us. Along the way, as far as my platoon is concerned, in my squad, there was a major crossroads there. And we were left there to watch that crossroads. And in that process, several things happened. One was, there was a building on the right. Now, this is out in the country, okay? Building on the right, back in there, that had a Red Cross flag on it. After a while, here came a bunch of men out in uniforms. Oh man, they were the slickest looking guys you ever saw. It turned out they were Luftwaffe pilots, all dressed in their best uniforms, and they were surrendering to us. There were, I don't know, maybe 15 of them. Not a whole lot, but they were all pilots. Then we could see way off that a convoy of trucks was heading down this road that crossed here. And it drove a certain distance, and I began to watch them through my field glasses, and they would stop. And they moved up a little bit farther, and they would stop, and I saw some men get out, and I could tell what they were doing. They were doing this. I was looking at them, and they were looking at us. And finally, they came to the crossroads, and they found that we had the place, and they surrendered. Well, this wasn't a combat outfit. This was a Luftwaffe fireman group, people who fought fires and looked after the airfields. And they were being commanded by a colonel, and the colonel surrendered to us there. Two men, Volkswagen Beetle. They had them then. The Germans had, but like a Beetle. They decided they wanted to run through the crossroads, and we had a man with a bazooka up there. It's like a bridge, huh? They went over the Autobahn. Our part went under it. And as they started up, well, he fired a bazooka at the back end of this little vehicle, and it stopped up at the top. And they had made a terrible mistake. They got out apparently with pistols. As best I could tell, it looked like from where I was, they were shooting. We got out and started shooting pistols. And right on the other side of the bridge was a tank set up there, and he had his machine guns, and he was firing this way. And I was shooting this way. And both of those guys paid the price of shooting their pistols at the fellow with the bazooka. Now there's insanity in war, and that's an example. Those men didn't see the reality of it, and they gave their life doing that, coming out and shooting. But we went, after we got off the crossroad, we went on down to Fraundorf and joined our unit, and that night we had men on outposts, and the fellows in my squad, they would say, "Come on down here." I said, "Listen, I hear troops, and I hear equipment on the other side of this little river here." And it was scaring them to death. They never heard a whole bunch of German soldiers like that. But the German soldiers weren't attacking. I was back in a house, and one of the fellows came up and says, "You've got to come down to the outpost. We've got a problem down there." I went down there, and I looked, and here was like a covered wagon, a small covered wagon with two men on it, with horses driving. And I looked, and it was a foggy night. I looked in behind, and there was another covered wagon. And it was dark, and it looked like I could see at least three of them. I said, what's going on? And those guys were so drunk, you couldn't imagine. Turned out they were it was some sort of a cookout, kitchen and cook bunch. And they wanted to surrender, so they came on in. The thing that would have been good about it was that we had several thousand German soldiers that began to surrender and come in there and were gathered there in that one place, and they had any way to feed them. So we thought, the cooks are here, okay, these fellas will have something to eat. They didn't have anything. They didn't have a thing as far as food was concerned. They just had bad breath with all that liquor they were drinking. So I'll say this about the town, the little town there. The Germans, we had, I think, on the order of 5,000 German soldiers there that surrendered. And our combat command, it was just really our battalion, probably had 500 or 600 men in it or something like that. But these men they surrendered. They built fires, big bonfires everywhere. They were all sitting around singing and nothing to eat. But the people in the town brought what they could. You could see them bringing stuff out. So, Dog Doherty took his half-track out trying to find German on patrol, trying to find food for these German soldiers. We had German officers, colonels, wanting to surrender their troops to him. He had just one half-track out there. He said, well, we're looking for food. You've got a lot of men in here. And that was the kind of thing that was going on at that time. The Germans were surrendering. But they weren't the SS. The SS was still holding out.
For posterity, explain the difference between a regular German soldier and the SS.
Well, I don't know if I can, technically, if I can tell you exactly everything there is about that, but...
Tell me what's your observation of the difference.
The observation,
on the battlefield.
okay, they acted differently. They were hard to fight. They were determined. They didn't think they were going to lose the war. The average German soldier would more exemplified a normal citizen who knew when the game was up. SS people were selected. They swore, the men in the Wehrmacht, that's the regular German army, they swore allegiance to Deutschland, to Germany. The men in the SS swore allegiance to Adolf Hitler, their leader. And that's a major difference right there. They were going to do what he said, and it didn't have anything to do with the country other than what Adolf Hitler said for the country. They were usually your best from the standpoint of age and health and that kind of thing. As the war dragged along, they began to draft people into the SS, as I understand it. But they still they were very selective in who they put in. They had people in there that were from other countries other than Germany. There may have been a few Frenchmen in there or something. I don't know. But that's what the SS was. They were always recognizable because they wore a collar that had two marks on them that looked like two strokes of lightning that formed like an S and an S. They were all recognizable because somewhere on their arm they had their blood type put on there so that they could a tattoo, so that we carried it on our dog tags. Well, they had it there, and that was only the SS. So whenever you were looking to see if a person was SS, you looked at his arm. Well, we ran into some SS troops south of Frauendorf as we headed down the Inn River trying to get into Austria. And there were some up on we were really going into the mountains at that point, in the mountain pass. And the SS were there. They had blown out the road where our group was, A and C Company. And I saw some of them running up the side of the mountain. The war was about to end, okay? Oh, no, that's a wonderful feeling, but you were still scared because as I heard that the battalion commander was up front. He came up along this blown out place, and here's the mountain going up like that, and they were throwing hand grenades down there and killed his driver with hand grenades, the SS troop. We backed up from the edge of the mountains there, and I always took my troops, my squad, out of the half-track when we were in a village or a place where there was a house or something. I'd say, come on, get in the basement. Let's stay down here until we move, and then we'll get back in the half-track. And this day, right here at the last day of the war, or last days, I saw this major, and he was outside this house where we were going in. I put my troops down in the basement. And he was out there, and he had a fellow with a radio, and he was down on his knee, and he had a pad, and he was talking to somebody. And there was while we were in the basement, there was a barrage of mortars hit all around in the area. And when we came back out of the basement, that major was dead. You know, the last day of the war. His name was, I believe, Major Starr. Morris Glover knew him. He was one of his people at one time. So there were some really sad things that happened with people getting killed. You know, going through all those months and then dying like that at the last time. Finally got the road fixed, and C Company went on down into Austria, not very far, a couple of little towns down there in this Inn River Pass. And then the word came that we were going to pull back and be relieved by the 36th Infantry Division, the same group that relieved us up at Hurlesheim. One of the things that happened in that area was that I was told to get my squad to guard a group of soldiers, and there were some SS troops in there. And I saw this one fellow, he had an armband on, and I went over and looked at it, and it said, Hermann Goering. Well, that was the man that was in charge of the German Luftwaffe, and he was part of the troops, I guess, that stayed with Hermann Goering to defend him or something, the Hermann Goering unit. I took that armband off of him, and I think it's at Abilene Christian now. I believe I put it in that box with the other stuff I sent down there. I noticed these Germans were, they're all right together. I don't know, there weren't very many of them, maybe 15 of them. It looked like they were passing stuff around or something. A lieutenant came up there. And he said, how are things going? I said, well, there's some SS guys in here with these fellows. I said, they're passing something around between them. I don't know what it is. And I asked them, and they just act dumb. Well, it turned out this lieutenant was a Jew, okay? He said, who was it? I said, well, it was that SS guy. Come here. What were you passing around back there? So somehow he asked that question. And I acted dumb. Took him over behind the barn. And he was over there for, I don't know, 30 minutes or so, 45 minutes. Pretty soon he came back with this SS guy. I said, what did you do over there? He said, I gave him a shovel. I told him to dig his grave. But he didn't do anything to him. He brought him back. And it turned out that the thing that they were passing around, finally found out some of the guys had some little pieces of candy, and they were sharing them amongst them. And they wouldn't tell me. They wouldn't tell me what they, I found out later, you know, they finally let me know. I guess they thought I was going to take it away from them. I don't know. So we sat in that area for a day or so, and it was around the 5th of May, and the word came that here comes the 36th Division, and we saw them, 142nd or 143rd Infantry Regiment. It's good to see those guys. They marched on through. We thought we were going to capture Hermann Goering because we had seen this fellow with this thing on his arm. They ended up capturing him down in Austria. They took him prisoner. But that was the end of the war for us, and we moved back up close to Augsburg. And you just can't imagine it's like unto graduating from high school. That feeling you have of freedom, and you're through with something. That's kind of an exaggeration, but we were tired, and we hadn't been getting much sleep. The food wasn't the greatest in the world. We were all down we'd lost mostly, I'd say most of us have lost about 20 pounds from our normal weight because there wasn't much, there just wasn't that much food. It wasn't that good. But we were healthy.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't stand to do that today. But that's kind of it, Charlotte.
Okay. I want to ask you a few things before we end. When you look back at your experiences during the war, what did you learn about yourself that you didn't know before you went to war?
Nobody's ever asked me that question before. I don't know. I didn't think about that. I guess, and I think this is common amongst men who are faced with that situation, it's like a test to see if you've got the courage to go do it. I found out that I could. Okay? That's one thing. I don't know about myself, but I felt, I mean, after 5 months of that stuff, I was somewhat unique coming through all that without getting hit. And there was something special about that.
What are your thoughts
I
about
felt a debt. You know what I'm talking about? A debt. And that stayed with me all my life. Yeah. But as far as what I learned about myself, I don't know other than that kind of thing, nothing much. All the time I wanted to get back home. I wanted to go to school. I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to get my education. I'd gotten up better than halfway through it when I went into the 12th Armored. I hated being assigned to the infantry. I thought that was the worst thing that ever happened to me. May have been the best thing. I don't know now. Sure have some of my best friends there, those guys.
What did you learn about friends and relationships from the war?
When?
What did you learn about friends and relationships during that time?
Well, other than, it was sort of like I said earlier, it's commonly known, I'm sure amongst military training people, if you keep people together long enough to get to know each other, they become a good team. They're really, I guess there's an emotional tie between them. And I found out that I never had another really close friend after those fellows who I trained with at Camp Barclay were gone. I had them. I knew who they were. I know who some of them are today, and have become better friends with one of them. I saw an old sergeant last night for the first time in 50-some-odd years. That was something. And I feel very friendly with him. But he and I trained at Camp Barclay together. I wouldn't say I was really a good friend of his at that time, but I knew him. I knew who he was. And we shared those early foxholes together, that kind of thing.
Did when you came back, were there some principles of living that you learned during the war that you used during your profession? Or you were an engineer, weren't you? Weren't you an engineer?
Yeah.
You became an engineer.
I'm a retired engineer. I've worked for 41 years in the aerospace business. I work on things like rockets, ramjets, F-16 airplanes, F-22, all those airplanes. But what did I learn? in the war that had to do with the way I would work in my profession.
Or how to deal with people?
I think pardon?
Or how to deal with people in your profession?
Yeah, I think by the time that I was through with that, I was through fighting. I didn't want to fight anymore. and there's something to that, huh? It's easy to get in your business relationships and in the competition that you have. It's easy to get into fights with people because you have disagreements and you think that the way you want to do it's better and all of that. And I learned that I didn't want to fight anymore. I wouldn't fight with people. Just wouldn't do it.
When you first came back to the United States, went home, Fort Worth?
Dallas.
Dallas. Went back to your mom and dad's house.
That's true.
What were you like? Did it take a while to get back to find out who George was?
Oh, yeah, I think so.
Can you talk to me a little about that?
Well, I can, more than anything else, maybe just talk about kind of the way things went.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I'd come home from Camp Chaffee, Arkansas, up in Arkansas overnight. Early in the morning, the sun hadn't even come up. I got to Dallas and went down to the Adolphus Hotel, got the barber to give me a shave. It's the first time I'd been in my hometown in all this time. And here I went to this big fancy barber shop. Gave him 50 cents. Boy, I was a big spender. I felt good. After I did all that, then I called home. And my mother answered the phone and she said, "That isn't you. That isn't you." I said, "Yes, it is." She couldn't believe it. And I guess I had my lingo and everything had changed because of the people I'd been around for a long period of time and been away from home. And I didn't quite sound like the Texan I had sounded like when I left. But she was very excited. I said, I'll be out there very quickly. So I went out to get a taxi cab to go home. When I got home, she was there by herself. And I said, where's Dad? Well, as soon as you called, he went out and got Ray Collier. And they went downtown to look for you in downtown Dallas. I said, well, I came out in a taxi cab. I said I'd be out here. Ray had, because of his wounds, of course, he'd gotten out of the hospital, and he was already going to Southern Methodist University, and he'd gotten married. He'd just gotten married just a short time before that. But I don't know. What more could I tell you about it, except I know the one thing, that I guess he'd been talking to Dorothy about me, and oh, she was so excited to see me. I never saw her before in my life. She ran up and threw her arms around my neck. I wasn't used to having girls treat me like that. It was a wonderful experience. That was Dorothy Collier. Of course, my mother's reaction, you can imagine what that was, and my dad. My dad did do something, and he mentioned this to me once in his later years. He said, "You remember that night when we sat down at the dining room table, just you and me?" He told me all about what happened, and just talked for a long time. And I said, "Yeah." I think he was kind of proud of himself because he was allowing me to let a little steam off, and I did. I think that helped me. I had formed certain attitudes and feelings that weren't quite right, and I got straightened out.
Was it just the war and experiences and?
Oh, it was the experiences of being in Europe and around those people and what was happening amongst people, ex-enemy and American soldiers and stuff like that after the war and those kind of things. And it bothered me a lot. I didn't like the relationships that were going on there.
Do you want to talk about that, or would you rather?
No.
Do you think you would have been a different person if you had not gone to World War II? If you hadn't gone to Europe? Do you think you'd have come to this part of your life and you'd be kind of succeeded? Been successful?
Been what?
You would have still been successful. You still would have lived the life that you've lived.
Probably. More or less. But I would have been a different kind of person, yes. I don't know, maybe I'd have been a little harder to get along with. A little meaner. Maybe I would have wanted to fight a little bit. I got all my fighting over with there in that 5-month period.
You came home, you had not married. What had you married?
Oh, I wasn't married. I didn't have a girlfriend or anything else back home. The only people I wrote to would be my grandmother and my aunt and uncle, and my mother and dad, and parents of my friends, and that sort of thing. Or to my buddies, or to my brother. I had a brother who was 3 years younger than I. He was in the Army, and I was really afraid that he was going to end up in a replacement depot or something. I really didn't want that to happen to him because of what was going on over there in Europe. I could see, good night. That kid doesn't need to be in there. And he wasn't. I told him, he ended up in sort of like an ASTP unit, going to school, and was at a fine university. What was it? Out in California. I said, keep your grades up. Don't fail over there. Stay with it. And he did. And when I came home from Europe on the ship, he was on his way over there, the Army of Occupation in Germany, and he was outside of Munich, and the little son of a gun had a higher rank than I did. Yeah, he was a tech sergeant, and I was a staff sergeant.
Well, I think we'll close for today, but I appreciate it. I may have to get contact with you again if there's some blocks of things I need to know as I start my thesis, but I appreciate your time.
Well, you're welcome, and I thank you.